Great.
Hello and welcome to Bitcoin with Jake. I'm speaking with Dalia Platt. Welcome, Dalia. How are you?
How are you, Jake? Thank you for having me here.
No, absolute pleasure, and thank you for joining. So you're another member of the amazing Looking Glass education crew that I have now worked my way through slowly but surely, hearing all of your wonderful stories to Bitcoin and how you all bring different things to the table. So I'm very intrigued to hear about what brings you to be part of the team. So just as an overview for the people listening, can you give me a brief introduction to the projects you're involved in today? And then once we understand what you work on in your everyday, we'll work back to understand how you got there.
Absolutely. Actually, I'm the newest member of the Looking Glass, and I've been with them very little. I feel very, very lucky and honored to be with them. I got to them in a very funny, not funny, in a very coincidental way. The truth is, probably, I guess, I don't know, maybe 8 months ago, I heard Greg Foss in an interview he was doing in Invest Answers. And I don't know, I had no idea that he was like that important or anything. And something about him really resonated with me. One of the things he said is that he was working on a platform about education. And he also spoke about his grandparents being that he had foreign grandparents, and that he wanted to help the underprivileged. And I don't know, there were so many things that he said in that podcast that really resonated with who I am and what I wanted to do. That I just, and I'm not a person to just go ahead and write to somebody out of the blue, but I did. I just went ahead and I wrote to him. I had no idea who he was. And I wrote him a letter and he replied. And long story short, he made a meeting with the rest of the group of the Looking Glass. And we spoke, and really nothing much happened. And then we ended up meeting at the Bitcoin conference. But in the meantime, he put me in touch with some people from El Salvador. And through him, I ended up working with a group called My First Bitcoin, Mi Primer Bitcoin, in El Salvador. And that's the project that I've really been focused on in the last 8 months. And it's been a really, really interesting project. And we've developed a diploma for the Salvadorian high school students. And we're also already in progress of teaching the first 200 students, and they're going to graduate in June. So I'm very excited about that. So we've been connecting both groups, My First Bitcoin and the Looking Glass. We're trying to make a collaboration between the two. And the truth is, I'm very passionate about helping underprivileged kids, underprivileged societies in general, because I feel that I was just born lucky. That's how I've always felt. I think that it's just a lottery, and I was born in a country of very, very poor people. And I was just one of those people that was not poor. And I was lucky to have an amazing education, an amazing family that took me, we traveled everywhere. Besides that, it was also a country with a lot of violence and a lot of poverty and a lot of, I'm from Colombia. So I was in Colombia in the time of Pablo Escobar, and it was a horrendous time to live there. But I feel that part of the violence and the poverty and everything is really our fault. And really it stems from lack of education. And I've always felt that since I'm really young. And I really feel that the only way to make a little bit of a change in the world is by educating people, and that's how I can give back, and that's how I can provide, giving a little bit back of what I think. I guess that's my way of giving back. I think that's the way that people can end up having some kind of financial freedom, some kind of, so that's really the long short of it. I guess I made
Dalia,
it too
thank
long.
you. There's so much for me to ask questions about in there. So let's do it. Let's go back to Colombia. So what was life like growing up in Colombia? And you mentioned already the difference in the wealth, okay, from the top to the bottom in somewhere like Colombia, and it drives violence. So what was it like growing up there? And you're based in the States at the moment, I guess, or
I am in the States. I'm in
yeah,
Florida.
so at some stage you decided to move. Talk to me a bit about what life was like growing up there, and this view you held, and how that proliferated into later decision making that you had.
Well, it was, truthfully, it was really tough. I think, like everybody else that grew up there, I think we have a lot of PTSD. We lived through the time of guerrillas and kidnappings and murders, and I cannot tell you how many people close to me were killed or kidnapped, or like, those are stories that, unfortunately, we all lived through that, or bombs, or I eventually ended up really coming to the States because of that violence. I think I was so fed up with it that I just couldn't take it anymore. My dad had this comes from before. My four grandparents, I kind of have a very different story in itself from a typical Colombian as well, because my four grandparents came fleeing from Europe, from the war in Europe. They came with nothing to Colombia because they were Jewish, they were persecuted, their family all died in Europe, and they came all at different times. So they came without the language, without a penny, without anything, and they, out of nothing, they created a lot. They gave their kids, my parents, they gave them education, they gave them amazing lives, and I have that as part of my heritage, and I grew up with that, and I know I value a lot what it is to come from nothing and be able to have something, and I know how much my grandparents suffered, and their family members were all killed, and so in part, what I'm saying is that when my dad was, it was already my dad, who was in his, well, he was already married. He had created with my grandfather a very successful business in Colombia, and they had plastics and it was a big industry. It was not an industry, a factory. It was like they did all the ornaments for Christmas that you put on the trees, and they also had buckles for, like, in the plastics and then the metals thing. They had like 400 workers. So he had a very big union, and the union was a very tough union, and he had to deal with that union. And part of my stress was that, well, I didn't know this until I was later. I was much bigger or much older, that he received a lot of threats to be kidnapped and a lot of times he would come home at 2 or 3 in the morning, and because he had been negotiating or being with the union. And I remember me standing in our apartment waiting for, there was no cell phones, there was nothing, and standing in the window waiting for my dad to come, if he was going to come, if he was going to be kidnapped. Like, just that itself was horrendous. So like on a daily basis, it was a very stressful situation. And then ultimately, I don't know where I went with that, but ultimately I studied in a different city where I grew up, also in Colombia. I studied industrial engineering, and then I was working, which is also something very, like, I think now thinking about it, it's very coincidental, because I think I worked for something that was the precursor of cryptocurrency at the moment. But in any case, there was, I think, one day that I was alone in my apartment, and car bomb exploded, and some of the windows in my apartment blew up. And I said, I can't take this anymore. So that was the day that I was alone, and there was millions of other things that had happened, but I said, enough is enough. And I was lucky that my parents had an apartment in Miami, and my brother and sister had studied at the University of Miami. And I said, I'm just gonna leave. And my sister was living in Miami, and I just applied for an MBA, and I said, I'm leaving. I can't stand this anymore. And I just applied to the University of Miami. I ended up here. I got in. That I ended up, very long story short, I ended up, which I never thought I was gonna ever get even married, but I ended up meeting my husband at the University of Miami, and I'm here for 26 years already.
Wow.
He was my teacher assistant in a class.
No way. Wow. That's so cool. Well, congratulations to you and your husband. You never know where you're going to meet your life partner, do you?
Yes,
and Dalia, I'm intrigued. So roughly when are we talking? So what was the date that you decided to move to Miami? And I'm assuming a lot of these events you mentioned were the kind of 10 years before.
Okay, so the 80s was when, like, the Pablo Escobar whole, like, I grew up, I was born in, like, I'm old already, very old. I was born in the 70s. Yeah. And all of this was through the 80s. And I moved in 1994. I was like 24, 25 years old when I moved here.
Wow. And sorry, and so are you affiliated with the University of Miami, like as a lecturer there or something, or that was just where you met your husband and then?
I just applied to do my master's there, and I got in, and I just went and did my master's of business, and I stayed there. Well, I ended up staying there, and I did a master's in finance, and there's a whole other story starts from there.
Well, we'll get into that. We'll get into that for sure. What I find so fascinating is people's decision making, and also people's adaptability, resilience, courage. Like for your grandparents to have gone through the experience they had in Europe at the time, completely out of their control, like absolutely horrendous, to then move to Colombia and have the balls to set up businesses and start building a life again. Like, it's insane resilience, isn't it? Unbelievable.
Their stories are amazing. My grandfather, one of my grandfathers started as in a gas station. He started literally being the person that put gas in the car
in Colombia,
in the cars of the. Yes, and then my other grandfather started door to door giving, selling things to people, and they really didn't even know, they didn't know one word of Spanish. And for example, my grandmother, the the moment she stepped foot in Colombia, her mom died. So she became the, like, she was the oldest daughter. So she became the house, like the
Wife,
person that had
essentially.
to
Yeah. Wow.
deal, like, so all of these stories have made me believe that, like, I don't know, like that, first of all, that it is possible to go from nothing to something.
Mm.
And another thing is that it's very hard to be persecuted, and it's very hard that I understand what it is to like, you can, there's countries, and when you live in a country like this one, it's very difficult for people to understand that there's other places where you can get your money, like you can get censored, how do you say that? Like that your money can be like taken away from you, or
Yeah.
like North Korea, or places in Africa, or that there's I don't know, that you can have a currency that is not worth anything anywhere else in the world, or we just live in such a bubble here. And I just, like, for example, afterwards, when I have twin boys, and that was one thing that was very important to me, when every year I would take them to Colombia, and I wanted them to understand how lucky they are and how much of a bubble we live in, because this is not normal. Like, we really, really don't live a normal life. Normal is people living in the streets, and that's what I saw every day in my childhood. And like, even like, we had housekeepers, they didn't know how to read and write. I remember being 10 or 11, I loved going on a Saturday and a Sunday at 6 in the morning. I would take a notebook and teach them how to read, how to write. I just thought it was so unfair. Everything about it was unfair. Like, how is there no education for most people there, like, in reality? And then we have, and the truth is, thank God, my dad, even though we had everything we could ever ask for, and we traveled all over the world, my dad was always telling us that material things don't matter. So we had like very basic cars, and very big, like, we never, like, we were not luxurious people. There was other people that were living it with cars that had that were bulletproof, and with chauffeurs, and we never had that. We lived our life as simple as possible, but we traveled everywhere. We had all the education in the world. But thank God I had a dad that taught me that material things are not important. And I try to instill that in my kids. And
So it's a
again,
very useful thing to have drummed into you. Yeah.
yes, because their parents, I think it comes from my grandparents. I think that the way.
And actually, if I could say, Dalia, even if you disagree with that as a mentality to train humans to think like, it's still a case that many people think like that. So the phenomenon exists, and that's what's interesting, right? What does that then create? And it's a certain type of character, it's a certain type of work ethic, it's a certain type of lifestyle. and that then permeates through the people around them, and it creates a type of society. It's so interesting, isn't it? Wow. And so Dalia, so you made it to Miami. Okay, so this childhood, you've done 25 years of your life, and you're like, okay, I'm going to pack my bags and I'm going. And this is like big moment. How brave! Like, tell me how that felt. And also, you mentioned you did a master's in finance. What did you go on to do in your professional career after you finished studying?
Well, okay, so let me back up a second. Before coming to Miami, I had just, I don't know, I had studied industrial engineering in Colombia. And once I had finished, I was working for this consulting company, because I think this is part of like what I was saying, that I think this ended up like linking, because what I did for 25 years had nothing to do with Bitcoin. But what I did 25 years ago has to do with Bitcoin,
Wow.
very strangely enough. I was working for this consulting company. Colombia is a very big flower exporter. And at the time, a lot of the flowers that were being exported to whatever, to the US or to Japan, like 80% of the flowers that got to their final destination got there and were dead. And the exporters didn't know what was happening in the whole process, in the whole shipment, who was not cooling them. Was it the shipping? Was it the trucks? Was it the, so I was very much into the whole logistics process of it. So we found a company called Sensitech that still, to today, I just found out it still exists. And it's very funny because their products haven't changed a bit, but that we brought these products that were called Temptail products, and they measured, what we did is we put these little sensors that would measure the temperature and the humidity of the flowers from the moment that they got cut and put in their boxes to the moment they got to their final destination. And then all that data got downloaded, and you could see if there was like a change in temperature where the problem had been. And then, for example, if it had been the truck company, you could fire the truck company or blame the truck company or whatever. But now that I think about it, it was really the beginning of the entire blockchain technology, because at that moment you didn't have a data, like a way to analyze data and in real time. And that was what was happening, that the truckers were trying to save energy, and they were just shutting their trucks down, and they didn't want the refrigeration, and so the flowers would die or things like that. So that was the whole thing. But it's funny because I just looked at this company and they still are doing the same thing, but they're not doing it with blockchain technology. They're still doing it with Bluetooth, but it was actually funny. But okay, but that's not the story. So then I came here, and when I got married, because this sensitive company had offered me to go to Europe and start Sensitech all over Europe. I don't know how they decided that, because I was 24 and I had gone to see them once, and I have no idea how I convinced them that I was good enough to do that. But I think that's partly also why I fled or flee. But yeah, I came here. I was petrified. I'm like, what am I gonna go do in Europe by myself? So I said, no, wait, I don't think I can do that. So I left that there, and very irresponsibly, by the way. And so I came here, I graduated. And then the problem was that I didn't have a visa to work. And I was going crazy because I'm one that has to work. I am not the person to stay at home. So I started tutoring, like kind of under the table because I had nothing else to do. So I started tutoring math and physics. And then my husband had come to Miami when he was 15, and he had gone to a high school here, to a very academic, like very highly, like very academic, rigorous school. And he took me there, and they seemed to like me, and I started tutoring there. And that led to me teaching at the university, and that led to me then teaching at high school, and that led to 25 years of me teaching math and physics, and I never stopped. And then when the pandemic happened, and then I was in the meantime, I was, I think, depressed because I missed Colombia and I missed the people. So I think my escape was work. And I loved working and I loved helping people, but I had my kids and they were twins and it was hard. And I just needed work. Work was an escape. So I worked many hours a day, every day. But then the pandemic came and I said, I think I had a midlife crisis prior to midlife, but a midlife crisis. And I said, no more, I can't do this anymore. And I was lucky that I said to myself, I'm not gonna do anything for a year. And I started first kind of investing in stocks, but then I got into blockchain and investigating, and then altcoins and Bitcoin, and it led me to the whole rabbit hole of like what everybody does, and then here I am.
Wow, I love it. But it's you can ask the same 10 questions to everyone who's in the Bitcoin space or has bought Bitcoin, and they have different answers. The journey is totally unique, and everyone's life is totally unique. And through that, the stories that come out are all like brilliant. It's so amazing to hear. Okay, so as a maths and physics teacher, I assume you have a good base of knowledge in those fields. When you look at something like Bitcoin, it must be obviously extremely appealing. You wouldn't be working on what you're working on now, but it's not a skill set that everyone has. So from that perspective, why do you think Bitcoin is so interesting?
I think it's the only way to give financial freedom to so many underprivileged people. I believe, I don't know if you were at the conference, in the Miami conference.
No.
With, okay, Jack Mallers gave the most amazing
presentation. Yeah,
presentation.
I probably watched it.
On the Lightning Network and the capabilities of what you're going to be able to do with Bitcoin through the Lightning Network, to be able to get to all these underprivileged countries. For example, if you are a poor person working, let's say in the United States, and you have to send money, which people are always doing that, and they're sending their money day by day because they have to work and live day by day. And they're usually sending $20 bills, and they're sending $10 bills by Western Union. They get charged 20% remittance fees. And they have no other option. They have really to their families. And their families are expecting that money. And there's really, up to now, there's really no other option to get their hard-earned money to their families. And it's these institutions that are becoming wealthy and rich and out of the poorest and most hardworking people, where there's a solution, and Lightning can solve that. Bitcoin can solve that. Um, there's so many reasons. Like I tell you, like another thing is, for example, as I went to Colombia all of these years, 10 years ago, the Colombian peso was 2,000 pesos per dollar. Today, it's 4,000 pesos per dollar. So it's a huge devaluation. So the rich people, yes, they can invest in dollars, and they have their bank accounts, and they have their knowledge on how to invest and where to invest. And there's the US currency, and there's no other option, whatever. They have their financial managers to tell them. But what about the people that their salaries don't increase as like there's no way their salaries are increasing at a rate at which inflation is increasing? And and I know I'm being very maybe very optimistic right now, because it's a very young Bitcoin is very young, and it's not going to happen in Colombia. I'm thinking about Colombia. Um, but it has to start somewhere. So, for example, El Salvador, like I see so many changes already happen. There's so many changes happening in El Salvador that I'm working with them. El Salvador has Bitcoin as legal tender. And although they just went in and just put it in without giving anybody any education, people really, like, there's no financial literacy. People in the streets are there's no financial literacy whatsoever. But so the people in the streets, or the normal person that you ask, of course they're not in favor of Bitcoin, because they have no idea what it is. If you tell them, I'm going to trade you a dollar for a money that doesn't exist, well, of course they're going to say no. Like a money that is not there, that you can't see, you can't touch, you can't do anything. But then on the other hand, like the school where we're doing this diploma, the first school, which is a very forward-thinking school. Just by starting the diploma there, it was a school that is a very, very poor city, a very poor town. And these kids that are taking the diploma, the Bitcoin diploma, these are kids that if they are not in school, they would go into a gang of thieves, and like really kids that are in the edge of making horrible decisions for life. And their school now, because of this Bitcoin diploma, and because of all the hype that has been going on around it, and the donations, and they used to sit on the floor to eat their food. And now there's been donations, and they have chairs and tables to eat in their cafeteria. So I know that this is not Bitcoin related, but investment is coming to El Salvador and helping these kids. And I see benefits that are like tangential to Bitcoin, that even if it's not Bitcoin, it's helping. So I don't care how it is. But
It's amazing,
it's
isn't it? It's just the most incredible thing when you kind of really start digging into what this means. Like it's a technology, it's a tool. You know, how do you use tools? Well, that's up to the user, but it's going to have an impact. And I've looked at something called social impact investing before. And this is done, basically for rich people. And they will say to you, do you want to have your money where it does good rather than does anything? And you go, yeah, sure, I'd love that. And they do something called positive screening, where they'll look at the stock market, they'll look at every other publicly traded asset, and they'll look at the supply chain and the board of directors and blah, blah, blah. And they'll say, look, these companies don't fit into our, sphere of interest. These ones do. We'll invest in those, and you'll help, grow a better world. I don't think that they've looked at Bitcoin seriously, because every single impact fund in the world should own a Bitcoin allocation. And simply from listening to what you've just described, there's no way that you can say that keeping the status quo, aka Western Union, in place, charging egregious fees, is good for the poorest of people. Like, it's not, when another technology exists that does it instantly for free, and like to their mobile phone. Hello, like, this is crazy. So yeah, well, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. Let's talk a bit more about the Bitcoin diploma that you've created. So I have a friend here, John. He will love this particular conversation we're having. He was on the show a couple of episodes before, and he works at Melbourne High, and he has Bitcoin club at school. So he's like the high school teacher that's really pushing. He's a German and urban horticulturalist teacher. And
Wow.
yeah, he has honey that he creates from his beehives that he sells for sats. And he has Bitcoin Club, and he's teaching kids about Austrian economics and self-custody of Bitcoin. And the main issue he has is getting them away from altcoins and trying to teach them about the importance of hard money. But I'm intrigued, because for sure I'll put you in touch with him. He started a Telegram group recently called Bitcoin for Schools, I think. And he's also developed some kind of what do you call it, syllabus for what he's done at his Bitcoin club. So, helping the children of, the adults of the future understand what Bitcoin is today is a huge part of financial literacy education. And it's insane that it's not being taught. And in fact, financial literacy is underplayed completely. I did a business degree, and I was never taught what money is. Like, I've just been reading
I
for the
wasn't
first
either.
time The Origins of Money by Carl Menger. Now, it's like 130 years old, this book. It's insane. But it's talking about saleability of commodities and how certain commodities are more saleable over time, and you want to sell stuff at market that you don't want to sell other things. You're like, I was never taught this in economics class. Like, what the hell? And yeah, so chat to me a bit more about the diploma that you've developed and what kind of impact you see high quality education having for these children.
Sure, absolutely. So the main idea is that it's a nonprofit organization, and we're being like, I'll say sanctioned. Like, the Ministry of Education is like saying absolutely go for it.
Okay.
And the whole idea is precisely for like we started already with version 1. Like, we already created this syllabus, and it's a little bit about the history of money. And keep in mind that because Bitcoin is legal tender in El Salvador, there's very little need, and these kids that that would be in gangs, they don't even know about altcoins. So there's like, that would not be an issue in this case, although we do talk about the group itself is non-judgmental. Like, we talk about everything. There's no political party. There's no, to give you an example, the government, I don't know if you're familiar, the government of El Salvador has a wallet called the Chivo wallet.
Yeah.
And it's a custodial wallet. And the diploma talks about the wallet, and the government gives them $30 in Bitcoin if they download the wallet. The Bitcoin diploma talks about custodial wallets, but our goal is for people to have financial freedom. So we also talk about non-custodial wallets. And we also, part of what I'm very much involved with is what I've always thought about, and that's part of my philosophy of education. I don't like education that is like just read and learn. I'm a very much of a, like, I like interactive learning. I've always loved to look for things that engage students and that make it fun and make it easier and make it like, that's always what I was looking for with math. I was always looking for kids to understand math easily and for them to, because I know it's hard, and this is even harder. This is so much harder. So what we've tried to do with this workbook is to make it as interactive as possible. So it's not just a book where they read. It's the first class, for example, they do a barter activity. They they take, it's a, like, they take little cards, and one person has I don't know, shoes, and the other person has a pencil, and another person has something else, and they have to barter with each other. To one person
Awesome.
wants something, the other person needs something, etc. So they learn by doing. Another day, they download their wallets, and we don't tell them what wallet to download. We just tell them download a wallet, but we want them to experience with different wallets that are non-custodial, because they already have the experience of the Chivo wallet. So we give them both perspectives. So and that's what we want. Or we take them, these kids have or had no phones, so we've given them access to phones, to computers. We take them to the blockchain explorer. We want them to look at, we have somebody that's helping us from maybe virtually to look at a mining plant, and for them to actually experience it. They go to the cafeteria and they can buy their snacks with Bitcoin. So again, every day the workbook has like a code, like scan, like a code that they can scan. How do you call that?
SQ code.
SQ code. Thank you.
Yeah.
And they can do something with it. So they're never staying in their own seats. They're never. So that's part of the curriculum that we're trying to develop. And these are the first 200 kids, and they're graduating on June 24th. I'm actually going there for the graduation.
Cool.
Which I'm so excited about. But then we're continuing hopefully with the rest of the country. And the goal is to graduate every high school student from this Bitcoin diploma, with this Bitcoin diploma when they graduate high school. It's a 10-week course, and they take it every Saturday. And at the end, it's also they take an exam, but the exam is also an exam where they do more than they write. They show how to create a wallet and how to look for their transactions. And if they made a transaction, can they find it on an explorer, or can they make a transaction? Or it's very, very much interactive. And we want that because they need it, because the country is already using it. So it would, now, on the other hand, for example, with the Looking Glass, our idea might be a little bit different, because we also want to offer financial literacy to the rest of the world. And it doesn't necessarily has to be Bitcoin. We just need to educate the world I don't know, I just read a study about there's like 30% of adults in the world are financial literate. Like the World Bank made a tiny little survey on there. They asked questions like, if you to adults or to kids or to that, if you put $100 in a bank, and what would you rather do, get 105 in a year or 3% in a year? That was like one question. The other question was, if you put $100 in a bank and your interest rate is 10%, after 5 years, will you have more or less or the same as $150? It was like 5 questions that were asked. Then other questions like, is it better for you to invest your money in just one business or in a few businesses? They were talking about risk, like 3-4 little very simple questions. And I don't know, like 70% of the people that they asked failed the test. It was something that is unbelievable. And they showed the statistics of the world, like of the population of the world, and all these third world countries, and I think the US and maybe Australia and Norway, and there was only a few countries that had passing grades on these questionnaires, and it's like you want to cry.
Mm. Wow.
So with the Looking Glass, we really want to give free education to the world. Like, how do people not know even that? Like, how are people gonna be a little bit more successful if they can't even answer that?
Yeah, it's shocking, isn't it? I think I calculated the other day that something like 2 billion or 2.5 billion people don't have bank accounts. So the unbanked is a quarter of the global population, roughly. I mean, this is insane. Like, so that none of these humans can interact on a financial basis, like with each other. I mean, how does that work? I mean, how do you not live a more difficult life as a result of that? And that's an amazing story you just told about the World Bank survey. Wow, 70% failure rate. Your story is getting me thinking. My sister has helped set up an NGO in Lebanon, and they take underprivileged kids, mainly like orphans, I think, off the street in Beirut and places like that, and they teach them to code. And the goal of their program is to develop software developers, and they then feed them into startups and other organizations as best they can. And they really feed off donations from generally the UK, which is where I'm originally from and where their main network is. But the story you just told about your Bitcoin diploma strikes me as very, very similar to the program that Tati runs. And you think, wow, if you could like develop that teaching model, it's all digital, basically, except for some money to pay for mobile phones and to get some teachers on the ground in wherever you want to be. So it's a highly scalable education model that would be actually incredibly cheap to give to thousands, if not millions of people all over the world. And if, for example, I introduce you to my sister, which I can happily do, I don't know if she could ever incorporate this kind of thing into her program or has any interest to. I've been trying to get her interested in Bitcoin and I'm doing my best, but I'm not sure it's really hit home how much of an impact it can potentially have to the people she's already trying to help. So the penny will drop at some point, but you think, how many people are already out there who have the same goal as what you have, which is to help underprivileged people, but they haven't understood that the best way to do that might be to help Bitcoin adoption and give them very basic financial literacy skills, which is extremely exciting because you think, oh, wow, once you've identified the problem, you can provide a solution and then you'll see the results of that. Which, how exciting. And so what this podcast is hopefully all about is not just personal journeys, but really about like how you feel about the whole thing. So I'm intrigued hugely by the fact that, someone with 20, 25 years worth of educational experience, I imagine largely, not to be too direct, but regurgitating the syllabus that a centralized authority is teaching you to teach, right? This is what you need to teach the kids. This is what the level you've got to get them to. It's a box ticking process. And it must be deeply frustrating as teachers sometimes trying to get through to kids with a syllabus that's just crap or isn't malleable enough to specific needs. You have, decided to take a break from your traditional career. You jumped down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Here we are today having this conversation. What makes you excited about the future? And how do you see someone like yourself, what does it feel like to be taking all of these skills and blending them together into building your own programs? And like, you can do it your way, basically, and interact with kids, you've already mentioned, in a more interactive way than just read and learn. So yeah, just talk to me a bit more about that and how that might feel.
I'm just I'm just very excited, because I think I can help in a much more impactful way. I guess for 25 years I was helping, but as I told you, I was tutoring and teaching at this school where all these kids were so privileged. And I had my own private tutoring company, and they would pay me so much money for the kids to go to the top Ivy League schools, and they would be getting perfect scores, and the parents would want them to get even higher scores. And that was the goal of the parent. And that was it. There was nothing else to it. And yes, some days it was wonderful and the kid would give me a hug and whatever. But the more, and even if I studied finance, like you said, you weren't taught any financial literacy in school. I did a finance degree and I wasn't taught any financial literacy at school. I am learning it. It is it. I really am learning about economics right now. And my eyes, even though I thought I was a person that was aware of life, I wasn't. And I'm reading these things and I'm reading these studies, and it's really like opening my eyes. And I'm like, okay, I have to do something about this. And even if it's, again, I am not a very idealistic person, I'm very realistic. But if I can help a little bit, and I don't know, like at least these 200 kids, I know I'm making an impact. So, okay, 200 kids, it's something. Maybe one of them didn't go into a gang. That's something. Maybe one of them will eventually become somebody in life or teach something to their own kid. It's something. So I just feel that, and I guess my husband's probably going to kill me because I'm not making a penny. And I thought I was not going to make a penny for like a year or so. I was going to study Bitcoin and like figure out what my life was going to be like. But you know what? I don't know. I'll figure it out. I just feel that right now there's more important things and I do need to make a living at some point, because again, I have to be realistic. But and don't get me wrong, I do like living a good life. I'm not, but this is really filling me. My kids just went off to college. My parents are in Colombia. I get to do what really like fills me, and I guess that's it. I really like.
That's great. But this is the point, isn't it? It's what drives us. what instinctively are we led towards? Why do we do something? And everyone has different reasons. But that search or yearning for a sense of purpose I see it everywhere, in my friends, in myself, in my family. And if it's not there, often we're not happy. Now, sometimes that's then to do with expectations we set ourselves are completely unattainable or whatever. We never reach them, and therefore we beat ourselves up. And it's that kind of snowball effect of self-doom. But feeling fulfilled is crucial. So wonderful. I'm so excited for you in the future. It does strange things to you, Bitcoin. Like, taking risk in your career at this stage is probably not something you imagined you would do. And I'm pretty certain that one of the reasons you are even considering doing that is for the same base reason as to why the Lightning Network and micropayments to, people as remittance replacement to Western Union is the case as well, which is like hard money, like Bitcoin, enables you to save your time and energy. And yes, there are short-term volatility issues with it, but you can be pretty fucking certain that in 4 years' time, whatever you've purchased today is going to be more purchasing power than it is right now. So if you've spent 25 years working and you've got some investments that you can either sell and buy Bitcoin with, or you've got excess salary that you were saving, that you had sitting around getting eaten by inflation, you're able to make that financial switch that wasn't previously even an option. You'd have to take risk. I mean, people still think of Bitcoin as risky, right? So I've done a whole U-turn where I now see a self-custodied Bitcoin is the safest place you could possibly have your wealth, full stop. Over a traditional bank, over an equity, over a government bond, over a currency of any kind, like without doubt. But a lot of people will still say Bitcoin's a scam and don't go near it, etc. But it does strange things to you. You're able to start zooming out a bit. What does fulfill me? How can I, look to help other people? And well, this is just another brilliant story as to how it perforates everywhere. And so, Dalia, I think that as a final question, I'm just going to ask, so what's your specific role within Looking Glass? Please, because I hadn't quite understood that at this point, because you're all a big team, so I'm never quite sure what's going on. So.
Yes, I know. Yes, and then I'm actually trying to bring engagement into the content. For example, that first course that they have that Seb and Daz created, which is brilliant. What I just did is I tried to create quizzes and some additional, precisely, like, we're trying to make it a little bit more interactive. We still don't have the software for it, but I did that. And in reality, the thing that I want to do more is curriculum for the students, for students all over the world. So we're working on that. And what I really am passionate about is really making curriculum interactive and engaging. And they're the writers. They're the ones that create the content and the course, and they are brilliant and in simplifying concepts. I just like, I don't know, I like engaging students. Things like what I was telling you with the barter, like with precisely, we're building this curriculum. Like, this is just a financial, more than a Bitcoin curriculum, the curriculum we're trying to build for students all over the world in financial literacy. I just want to make it engaging and fun, and so that students learn, but they retain their learning. So within each module or each lesson, they have an activity to have in the lesson. It's not just stay on.
No, awesome, and it's it's definitely easier to learn sometimes when you get thrown a task or you're made to think about the content you're reading. As much as I love reading, sometimes you've gone and read a page and you realize I actually wasn't even thinking about what I was reading, and so you have to go back and redo it. Well, Dalia, it's very exciting. Thank you so much for spending some time with me and telling me your story. We're going to close it up there because we're just rushing up, coming up to an hour. Last question, where can people get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Just I'm on Twitter. I'm not a very social person, but Looking Glass or my first Bitcoin, I
Yeah,
am
cool.
both there in those two places.
Well, I'll try and link. So the Bitcoin diploma project's called
My First Bitcoin.
My First Bitcoin. Okay.
It's also
And
in Spanish.
the Looking
It's
Glass
new.
Education, I'll put the links in my podcast summary.
Thank you so much.
Well, Dalia, thanks so much for joining me today. Take care and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
And thank you also for telling me about all your stories, your sister, and like those are all
so
very
my sister
interesting.
and so Tati and John, I'll definitely get them in touch with you, 100%.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Dalia.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.